So hello and welcome to today's rather controversial video. So I'll admit, I think GTA 5's story is probably one of the weakest out of the series. And I can already hear a lot of people asking why, because it's great, it's your typical GTA story action flick and all that. Well, I've played through most of the GTA stories, excluding Vice City stories, I swear I'll get around to that one day. But to me, GTA 5's story just feels a bit weaker compared to other entries. That doesn't mean I hate it, I just want to clarify that because I don't. But in this video, I want to kind of go over why I think so. So I think one of the biggest issues with GTA 5's story was it was trying to be too much like GTA 4 Episodes in Liberty City was. As when you look at it, the GTA 4 trilogy had 3 protagonists, 3 different stories but 2 massive overarching stories which essentially tie all 3 games together in a way that feels natural and have some crossovers with one another, which explains why some events happen and give you a different point of view, such as the Diamond Exchange for example. But with GTA 5's case, I think this falls a bit flat, with some parts of GTA 5's story clearly favouring some characters over others and leaving quite a few holes in some other stories. Now I think Franklin is most affected by this, as I feel when Trevor's brought into the story, Franklin becomes the third wheel basically, and the story has a much heavier focus on Michael and Trevor than Franklin. Like during the first few missions we do get a pretty decent insight into Franklin's life. He works at a local car dealership with his best mate Lamar and is somewhat involved in the gang life. But then that entire arc gets dropped pretty quickly when Michael's brought into the picture, which isn't that bad technically because it is a good natural build up of Michael and Franklin's friendship, but we only get like 2 missions revolving around Franklin's gangster lifestyle, and the rest of his story is just him essentially tagging on with the other 2. He gets a few missions here and there, but ultimately is completely minuscule compared to Michael and Trevor. Now one major bit of the story I always felt was kind of handled badly was the Brad plot, and I'm going to explain how I think Rockstar dropped the ball on what I consider to be the most interesting aspect of the story. So I consider the Bury the Hatchet to be one of the best moments in GTA 5's story by far. We have Trevor being Trevor and trying to convince Michael to bust Brad out of prison, get the crew back together with Franklin, only to suddenly start asking questions about Michael's grave. Who was buried there? Was it sand? Was it Brad? Whatever. Before coming to the realisation it was Brad who was buried there all along, and his entire life for the past 9 years has been a lie. Which I think Michael did a slight tell here, as when Trevor asks him, Michael kind of sits back, goes quiet and does this weird thing with his hands, which he doesn't do at any other point in the story. So Trevor runs off and there's a real sense of urgency as you feel all hell's about to break loose. The confrontation between the pair is fantastic and does an amazing amount of character development for the pair. We know Michael is a liar until the very end, and we see how loyal Trevor is to Michael. He was never going to hurt Michael because he cares for him, which is also why Trevor throws his gun at Michael's head rather than shoot because he never had bullets to begin with. So the Chinese kidnap Michael and then we end on a cliffhanger. Now I like this because it really gives the Chengs a good villain aspect. It shows that while we couldn't see them, they were definitely observing Trevor from afar, and gives them a sense of threat and sneakiness to them too. Now the next mission, Pac-Man, which I consider to be the most tedious in GTA 5 by far, does a fantastic job at expanding upon Trevor's character and expresses a lot of pent up anger and other emotions he has towards Michael, Brad and everything else that has happened in the story so far. Even though the Mara is completely confused, it has some fantastic character development for Trevor, who just really wanted to release his feelings, and sets up a lot of conflict between the duo. However, this conflict between the pair gets dropped pretty much instantly after Michael gets rescued, as it's straight back to business with Michael and Franklin being hired to put a heist on the FIB headquarters, and nothing else really about Trevor until a few missions later. So a few missions later we have the FIB, IAA, Merryweather and pretty much every government agency in existence around, and Trevor suddenly appears and protects Michael and Dave, which, in fairness, is addressed when Trevor says he wants to kill Michael himself, yet obviously never does, but instead tells Michael he doesn't trust him at all, yet he still wants to pull off the Union Depository heist. Now this part to me makes no sense whatsoever. Why would Trevor even consider going anywhere near Michael after knowing he's the reason the North Yankton heist went to shit to begin with? And secondly, I mean it, the Brad stuff gets dropped here and never really brought up again. There is no payoff to this at all. Like there's no conclusion to it, at least one that I can remember anyway. Now going off how strongly Trevor felt about Brad, you know, how much he brought him up a lot and how utterly broken he was at finding out the truth, it seems like there's something big missing here. This rather huge chunk of the GTA 5 story is just completely not written. Trevor is a character who, when he cares for somebody, he shows it strongly. Despite being a psychopath, he would never hurt those he cares about, and this is evident by how he acts towards Laszlo when he's sort of objectifying Tracy, how he treats Patricia. He never intended to hurt Michael even during the betrayal. So casually just dropping the grudge between Trevor and Michael and never having it play a role, something just feels a bit missing, you know. Wait, my mistake, Trevor does casually mention it and he thinks Brad was a dick in a conversation with Michael, I believe, if you hang out in free mode. So I have to ask, what was the point in it, you know? Like, why have Trevor care so much for Brad if he's just going to brush it off as, Brad was a dick? Now this is something I feel GTA 5 struggled with, payoffs for big events. Like, for example, take Franklin rescuing Michael. How come the Chengs never went after Franklin because of that? You'd think the Chengs would be very well aware that some black guy starts coming in shooting up the Cheng family members and freed Trevor's lover. And you know, that could eventually cause a bit of trouble for Franklin down the line when the Chengs do their investigating, find out where Franklin is and start causing trouble for him down the line. But no, Franklin gets away with it and the Chengs just don't appear until the end of the story. And this is another effect I think of attempting to tell a story like GTA 4's trilogy was. Most of the antagonists are quite weak in that department. One of the problems with GTA 5 I feel is there were too many antagonists, but not enough screen time for them. Like for Michael we had Steve Haynes, Martin Madrazo and Devin Weston. For Trevor we had the Chengs and Steve Haynes. And for Franklin we had Devin Weston and Stretch. You can kind of see how the story interlinks with each other, but at the same time there's not much strong emphasis on the individual antagonists for a specific protagonist. Now not many of them played that much of a huge role either compared to other antagonists we know of in previous GTA entries. They just came and went pretty quickly. For example, take Martin Madrazo. He appears very early on in a very well done confrontational setup because it makes you really think that Michael and Franklin will be at his mercy throughout the story. Martin is very threatening. Knowing he's the leader of a Mexican drug cartel also puts him up there as being a perfect antagonist. Even more so when you know what Mexican cartels are capable of doing. But then he disappears after the first heist, which okay, fair enough, Michael did repay his debt to Martin, so there's no reason for him to stick around. But then he reappears after a while to give Michael and Trevor a task, which is then done in a kind of brilliant way to build up conflict between Martin Madrazo, Trevor and Michael when Trevor kidnaps his wife, causing the pair to essentially be exiled from Los Santos. But then Madrazo disappears forever after Trevor off-screen cuts his ear off. Which isn't that much of a payoff for a typical GTA antagonist, you know. Like imagine if say Officer Tenpenny or Raskolov or Micah Bell or Gary Smith was handled in the same way. It would just be really piss poor. Then we have the Chengs who appear for like, what is it, 3 missions when we first meet Trevor, and then they disappear completely until Trevor finds out about Brad's death, Michael gets rescued, and they're not seen again until the final mission. And then we have Stretch, and honestly Stretch is just the worst antagonist out of the GTA series, excluding what's his name, the guy who looks like Stalin from Liberty City Stories. Stretch is just the worst antagonist in GTA history, I think. He appears in how many missions, is it like 2 I think? Maybe 3? He's got no character to him whatsoever, he's not intimidating whatsoever, and it's just... honestly, you could erase Stretch out of the story and there'd be no changes to it whatsoever. I'll get that Devin and Steve are probably the real big main antagonists, but even then, they just didn't feel as threatening as characters like Tenpenny, Raskolov or Salvatore Leone were. And none of them were really memorable either in my opinion. Take characters like Ray Bulgren from GTA 4. In regular GTA 4, he was pretty intimidating, but in Battle of the Gay Tony he was toned down a bit and became much more comedic, but even then he had some pretty threatening moments instead of just being funny, angry Bulgarian man. You know, like that scene where he scares Luis Lopez by having him find the cook's decapitated head in a box on a rooftop, and then has Luis ambushed by snipers. Something like that kind of solidifies that Ray Bulgren is a character you do not want to get on the wrong side of. So if I had the choice, I think Rockstar should have went with the GTA episodes from Liberty City approach, where you choose what character story you want to play and have a single protagonist playthrough, so then it can expand upon their story, answer some unanswered questions, plus I think it could have made GTA 5 much longer too. Like imagine if you chose Trevor's story, instead of just sitting through the Michael and Franklin stuff at the beginning, you get an entire chapter explaining Trevor's life in Sandy Shores, we get a background to his rivalry with the O'Neills and the Lost MC. Or say choosing Franklin, instead of doing the North Yankton prologue we jump straight to some gangster missions that give a stronger focus to Franklin's life in the hood instead of a tiny glimpse of his job before it shifts to Michael. Or in Michael's case, instead of just letting him be unplayable after Trevor figures out he's alive, we could have some more missions involving his dealings with Martin Madrazo, Lester and his family before the surprise of Trevor turning up on his doorstep. Or possibly some stuff that explains what happened to him after he's kidnapped by the Chinese. There's just so much potential I think here. Now overall, GTA 5's story is not bad, but it's not Rockstar's strongest writing either. You know, I just think there's a lot of missed potential overall. You know, it's nowhere near as good as like San Andreas or GTA 4, but anyway, that's just my opinion. I completely understand if you want to go ahead and call me a fucking idiot in the comments, but that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching and have a great day.